under a crumbling stretch of coastline in Fife, Scotland, a body was waiting to blow apart everything historians thought they knew about a vanished people. For over 1,000 years, the world called the Picts Scotland's lost mystery race, a tribe that carved cryptic symbols into stone and then disappeared without explanation. New science had already proven that legend wrong once. The ground was about to prove it wrong again, and expose just how little the official record had actually checked. Rome gave this people their name almost 2,000 years ago, Picti, the Painted Ones, and the world simply repeated it for 2 millennia without asking if it was true. Nobody checked, not until a storm tore into this coastline, and a site warden named Stuart Cook walked out to inspect the damage. What he found sticking out of the eroded sand wasn't debris, it was a human skull, and the age stamped on that skull was about to make the official story of the Picts a lot harder to defend. That skull surfaced in December 2023 after Storm Fergus battered the Fife coast in front of the single most important stretch of Pictish rock art in Scotland, the Wemyss Caves. The Wemyss Caves sit on the north shore of the Firth of Forth, cut into soft sandstone by a sea that once stood higher than it does now. As many as 11 or 12 caves once existed here. Only 6 survive today. Court Cave, Dew Cave, Well Cave, Jonathan's Cave, Sliding Cave, Gasworks Cave, narrow throats of rock, running back into darkness. Cut directly into the stone inside them are more than 50 symbols and figures. A double disc, a creature nobody can identify, known only as the Pictish Beast, a 6-oared boat that may be the oldest image of a boat ever found in Scotland. There's even a carved figure locals nicknamed Thor and his Hammer. Here's the first correction worth making. None of this was painted. The Picts carved. Deep, deliberate lines cut into rock that has outlasted the people who made them. Even the name is a kind of trick. That's not trivia. It means every fact the world inherited about who the Picts were started as an insult, written down by the Empire fighting them. The Roman writer who coined it in the year 297 wasn't describing a nation. He was mocking an enemy he barely understood. For centuries, that Roman insult was almost all anyone had to go on, along with a wall of unreadable symbols and a story that this people simply vanished. No surviving texts in their own hand, no decoded language. Historians filled the silence with legend. An exotic tribe descended, according to the medieval monk Bede, from Scythians who sailed in from somewhere near the Black Sea. Then the ground in front of Wemyss gave up a body. Stuart Cook wasn't the first to find bones on this coast. At least 5 sets of human remains had turned up here since the 1980s. The most recent, in 1988 and 1993, radiocarbon dated to around the 11th century, early medieval, right in the window when Pictish carvers were still working these walls. So when Cook found a skull, and then a second more complete skeleton lying on bedrock nearby, curled into a tight crouch, the assumption was simple: another Pictish-era burial. Archaeologists from Scape expected exactly that. AOC Archaeology moved in to excavate. Historic Environment Scotland got involved. Samples went off for radiocarbon and isotope testing. But that crouch position kept nagging at anyone who knew their prehistory. Medieval burial lies straight, hands folded, facing east. This body was folded in on itself, a shape archaeologists associate with something far older. Nobody had an explanation yet. Just a strange detail and a weight. While that wait continued, a much bigger crack had already opened somewhere else entirely, not on a beach, but inside a genetics lab. In April 2023, a team led by Dr. Adeline Merez published results in the journal PLOS Genetics that took direct aim at the old Scythian legend. They pulled ancient DNA from 2 Pictish-era skeletons, one from London Links in Fife, one from Ballantor in Easter Ross, and compared the genomes against more than 8,000 ancient and modern samples. The result wasn't ambiguous. These men were not steppe nomads. They descended from the Iron Age people who already lived in Britain, This wasn't a footnote correction. It was proof that the exotic, vanished tribe the world had been sold for centuries never existed at all. The paper went further. The two Pictish men shared more genetic material with people living today in western Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Northumbria than with people in southern England. The Picts didn't vanish. Some of them just kept living under a different name. The study also knocked over another old theory that Pictish society passed power through the female line, a matrilineal kingship running through mothers instead of fathers. Mitochondrial DNA from 7 individuals at London Links showed too much diversity for that idea to hold up cleanly. One more piece of the exotic, alien Pict myth quietly dismantled. That should have settled the question of who the Picts were. It mostly did, except the entire finding rested on 2 full genomes from 2 men from cemeteries 160 kilometers apart, enough to break the Scythian legend, not enough to close the file. Even the study's own critics called it a strong first step on thin evidence. And on the Fife Coast, the bones were still waiting on their own answer. It came in October 2025. SWACS announced the radiocarbon results. Not medieval, not close. The 2 individuals found eroding out of the coast in front of Wemyss dated to somewhere between 750 and 800 BCE, the early Iron Age. Nearly 1,800 years older than anyone expected. SWACS's chair called the find of national historic importance. And it's easy to see why. It was proof that this exact coastline mattered to somebody centuries before the Picts existed to claim it. Before a single symbol was ever cut into that rock. Before Rome had sent one soldier north to give this land's people a name. So the mystery didn't close. It flipped. The real question was never just who were the Picts. Genetics had mostly answered that. Indigenous, local, continuous. The deeper question became, why does this exact stretch of coast, this exact cluster of caves, keep pulling people back to it across nearly 2,000 years? Iron Age bodies, buried here around 800 BCE. Pictish carvers working the same walls more than a millennium later. Medieval burials laid along the same shoreline centuries after that. Maybe this was simply useful ground, shelter, high tide line, defensible rock. Or maybe something about this coast carried meaning that outlasted the people who first gave it meaning. Nobody can prove which. It's a strange thing to call a coincidence. If that idea unsettles you, the story only gets stranger once you leave the coast and look at what the Picts were actually capable of. For a long time, the assumption ran alongside the exotic myth, like a second insult. Primitive people, isolated at the edge of the known world. Excavations at Rhynie in Aberdeenshire tore that apart. A farmer named Kevin Alston turned up a carved stone there in 1978, showing an axe-wielding warrior, the Rhynie Man. Digs led by Gordon Noble's team between 2011 and 2017 found wine amphorae shipped from the Mediterranean and glass imported from France, buried under a fortified center ringed with ramparts and standing stones, a royal seat plugged into trade networks running through the Byzantine and Merovingian world. Even the name gives it away. Rhynie likely comes from an old Celtic word for king. People, supposedly, too remote to matter, were importing wine from the Mediterranean while carving their own name into stone. Burghead, further north on the Moray coast, is the biggest Pictish fort ever identified, famous for its carved bull figures. Aberdeen-led excavations from 2015 onward uncovered longhouses, massive ramparts, and a coin minted under Alfred the Great, tracing continuous occupation from roughly 500 to 1000 AD. Even objects long assumed to be Pictish are getting quietly rewritten. The Norreys Law hoard included a silver plaque carrying a symbol identical to one carved in the now collapsed West Dew Cave. Recent work by National Museums. Scotland has reinterpreted part of that hoard as fragments of a late Roman period helmet, something once filed as Pictish treasure that may actually be older and repurposed. That's not a small correction, that's a museum label quietly admitting it might have been wrong for over 100 years. If the material culture keeps forcing revisions, the caves themselves save the strangest correction for last. 200 kilometers north of Wemyss, on the Moray Firth, sits the Sculptor's Cave at Cove Sea, one of only 3 known places in Scotland where Pictish symbols were carved directly into a cave: a fish, a crescent and V-rod, a pentacle. The symbols cluster only around the entrance passages, never deeper inside, as if whatever this place was for needed to be marked at the threshold, not the interior. Sylvia Benton excavated it first in 1928, pulling out late Bronze Age gold hair rings, a Roman coin hoard, and human remains buried in the cave floor. Most of what she found is now lost. But 9 neck vertebrae survived. Decades later, researchers led by Ian Armitt ran AMS radiocarbon dating on them, and the results split the cave's history into 2 separate, horrifying chapters 1,000 years apart. In the late Bronze Age, children's bodies were brought into the cave, possibly displayed near the entrance. Later, during the Roman Iron Age, the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, people were killed inside it, at least 6 individuals, 4 adults and 2 children or young teenagers, struck from behind while kneeling. One neck was severed cleanly in a single blow. Another vertebra shows 11 separate cut marks. This wasn't accidental violence. It was staged, repeated, deliberate, a message someone wanted the cave itself to remember. That is not a burial. That is an execution, staged in a space already treated as sacred, generations after the cave had first been used for something else entirely. Nobody knows exactly why. The theories range from ritual sacrifice to public punishment to violence tied to Rome's shifting northern frontier. None of it is proven. All of it sits directly beneath carvings placed at that same threshold, facing whoever walked in. The carvings themselves raise a separate fight. For decades, researchers assumed the Pictish symbol system belonged to the 6th and 7th centuries AD, a late flowering right before the Picts folded into history. Then in 2018, a team led by Gordon Noble published new radiocarbon and Bayesian dating from Dunacair, a sea-stack fort near Stonehaven, in the journal Antiquity. The symbol stones there had been reused as building material inside a rampart that peaked in use during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. This means the carvings themselves are older still, pushing the whole tradition back 200 or 300 years into the shadow of the Roman frontier. That shift matters more than it sounds. It means the Picts weren't inventing a symbol system in isolation long after Rome had left Britain behind. They were carving it while Rome was still watching them across a wall. They may have been a response, an identity carved into stone by people who needed the world to know who they were, right as an empire tried to define them. What do the symbols actually say? Nobody fully knows. A 2010 study tried to prove mathematically that the symbols behave like written language, borrowing entropy analysis from information theory. Computational linguist Richard Sproat pushed back hard, arguing that non-random ordering alone doesn't prove writing. Linguist Catherine Forsyth has spent decades arguing the language behind these symbols was likely a Brittonic tongue related to Welsh. The leading theory today is that the symbols encode personal names, a kind of carved signature. But researcher Helen McKay has pointed out a problem that never quite goes away. 3 symbols alone, the beast, the crescent, and V-rod, the double disc, and Z-rod, cover a huge share of every known example. If this is really a system recording individual names, why does the vocabulary look so narrow? Nobody has an answer that satisfies everyone. Even the word Pictish may be less of an ethnic label than assumed. Historian Alex Wolff argues it began as a loose, pejorative Roman term, closer to a slur that stuck than a name a people gave themselves. The Picts may never have been one tribe at all, but a shifting alliance of northern British groups lumped together by outsiders. The ending of that confederation is better documented than its beginning, and it isn't a disappearance at all. In 839, a Viking army inflicted a catastrophic defeat on Pictish forces, shattering the existing political order. Out of that collapse rose Synaed MacAlpin, Kenneth MacAlpin, in the 840s, a ruler still styled King of the Picts. It was his grandson, ruling from 900 to 943, under whom the Kingdom of the Picts became the Kingdom of Alba. The people didn't vanish in that transition. Their language faded, Gaelic culture took over, and the symbol carving that had run for 600 years simply stopped. That's absorption, not extinction, a detail the vanished tribe version of the story conveniently leaves out. By the time the Picts vanished from the historical record on paper, the world had already decided they were strange and unknowable. The genetics say otherwise. Local, continuous, closer to us than the legend allowed. But the caves keep insisting there's still something unaccounted for. A body folded into the earth 8 centuries before Christ. A killing site with a 1,000-year gap between its two uses. A writing system, if it is one, that still refuses to be read cleanly. None of it is finished, and the ground itself is running out of time. Wemyss has already lost more than it kept. Of the 49 carvings recorded by antiquarians in the 1800s, only 26 survive today. In 1986, someone drove a stolen car into Jonathan's cave and set it alight, destroying a carved frieze that had survived 1,000 years of weather in a single night. That fire is the reason the Save Wemyss Ancient Cave Society exists at all, a volunteer charity formed within weeks of the blaze, still running tours, still fighting erosion, heading into its 40th anniversary in 2026. The fight to save this place is not just about money. In 2013, Historic Environment Scotland's own concern over the cave's deteriorating condition led to the formation of a working group pulling together the local estate, SWACS, SCAPE, and the council. The numbers they were working with were brutal. £12,000 can pay for a full laser scan of the caves. £2 to £3 million would be needed for physical sea defenses that might never come. One counselor summed up the calculation bluntly. The scans exist so that at least something survives, if the caves are taken from us. Between 2013 and 2015, SCAPE and the York Archaeological Trust, laser, scanned the coastline and cave interiors, pulling out carving detail too worn for the naked eye to read, work that won a national award in 2014. At Covacia, the tide itself guards the secrets. The cave is only reachable at low water, which is partly why most of Benton's original human remains from the 1920s are simply gone now. What researchers have instead are digital ghosts, laser scans, and structured light models pulling detail out of worn stone the eye can no longer see. In 2020, Ian Armitt and his co-authors published the fullest account of the site, a book called Darkness Visible, and even they were careful to admit how much of the story remains reconstruction, not certainty. So where does that leave the shoreline in front of Wemyss and the skull that started all of this? The isotope results, the tests that will finally say where those Iron Age bodies came from and what they ate before they died on this coast are still being processed. But the bigger verdict is already in. The DNA closed the case on the Scythian myth. The radiocarbon dating on those bones closed the case on how old this coastline story really is. The trade goods at Rhynie and the ramparts at Burghead closed the case on the idea that these people were primitive. The Picts were never the exotic, vanished race the world was told about for 2,000 years. They were already here, walking this ground, long before Rome ever gave them a name, and some of their blood is still walking around Scotland today. Somewhere on that Fife coastline tonight, the tide is still working the cliff edge, pulling sand away from bone, stone away from carving, one storm at a time. A skull that waited 27 centuries to surface did it without warning, and it rewrote the timeline the moment it broke through the sand. Above it on the cave wall, a Pictish beast still stares out from the rock, carved by people who were never as foreign as the label Rome gave them, guarding a threshold that was ancient long before anyone ever picked up a blade to mark it. The Picts didn't vanish. History just stopped looking in the right place. If you want the next one of these hiding in plain sight, hit subscribe and let me know. What do you think that Iron Age body was doing on this coast, 1800 years before a single Pictish symbol was ever carved?